I am very happy to talk to you today. Perhaps today is not the right word. It's already very late. It's almost midnight. Tonight would be a more accurate word. I'm very happy tonight to talk to you about New Historicism. It is one of my favorite areas. New Historicism is a theory and practice which originated in the late 1970s and started gathering momentum in the early 1980s. Easily the most famous name associated with New Historicism is the name of Stephen Greenblatt. In fact, the term New Historicism was coined by Stephen Greenblatt rather casually in 1982 while he was writing the introduction to his book, The Power of Forms in the English Renaissance. What is New Historicism? New Historicism is a new kind of historicism. What is historicism? Historicism is an attempt to historicize something. What do we mean when we say historicize something? We mean when we say historicize something that we are trying to relate it to its history. So historicism is an attempt to relate something to its history. But why new historicism? Why not just historicism? Because there is a difference between new historicism and old historicism. You must remember that historicism has been very much part of literary studies long before Stephen Greenblatt. But that is old historicism. What Stephen Greenblatt speaks about, practices, is new historicism. And new historicism differs significantly in several ways from old historicism. Let us look at the differences between old historicism and new historicism. Old historicism saw history as the background and literature as the foreground. New historicism does not differentiate between background and foreground. New historicism says that both history and literature operate on the same plane. Old historicism believed that history can influence literature. After all, history was the background to literature. New historicism accepts that history can influence literature, but adds that literature can in turn influence history. According to New Historicism, the relationship between history and literature is a symbiotic one. Old historicism saw history as objective, viewed history as a set of facts. New historicism does not believe that history is objective. It believes in plural histories. And according to New Historicism, there is not much of a difference between the material that goes into the production of history and the material that goes into the production of literature. According to old historicism, history is unmediated. New historicism holds that history is always mediated. Old historicism saw the movement of history as linear, as moving from one stage of progress to the next stage of progress. New historicism believes that history executes a very complex movement. It can never ever be called linear. If there is progress in the trajectory of history, well, new historicism has very serious doubts about it. Old historicism believed that there is only one history, whatever be the viewpoint you take. There is only one set of objective facts which constitute history, whatever be your perspective. New historicism thinks that the perspective is very important. History is dependent on from which point of view you try to see it. History from the point of view of the colonizer is very different from the same history from the point of view of the colonized, to give an example. I think that new historicism arose as a reaction to new criticism. In new criticism, the critic viewed the text in isolation. The text was seen as an object and it was subjected to rigorous analysis and evaluation. But there was no attempt to bring in the biography of the author or the situation in which the author wrote the text or the influence of the other texts on this particular text or the influence exerted by this particular text on the texts that followed it. In reaction to this, the new historicists held that every text is a product of the social, economic, cultural, political practices of the time. If these practices had not been there, the text would not have been written. And the text, in turn, influences the context in which it happens to be written. The two figures who influenced Stephen Greenblatt very much and consequently the entire movement called New Historicism are Marx and Foucault. Karl Marx attempted to work out a relation between economics and literature. Marx held that economics is the base and that everything else, and this includes literature, is the superstructure. It is the base or the economics which decides the superstructure which includes literature. Stephen Greenblatt accepted that there is an equation between literature and economics, for that matter, not only economics, but also other aspects of life, like sociology, like politics, like culture, and try to analyze, evaluate, and comprehend the relationship between literature and all these aspects of life. While Marx insisted that economics is the base and everything else is the superstructure, Stephen Greenblatt attempted to adopt a more nuanced approach. He held that the influence is not one sided, the influence is mutual. The second figure who influenced Stephen Greenblatt strongly is Michel Foucault. Stephen Greenblatt fully imbibed the Foucauldian concept of power. According to Foucault, power is not something wielded by a few people somewhere at the top. Power is something which circulates throughout society. In his writings, Greenblatt attempts to apply this concept of power and demonstrate how power is sometimes held by even the so-called powerless people. The efforts of Stephen Greenblatt have resulted in the breaking down of the boundaries between artistic production, and other kinds of social production. It is now widely accepted that just as the context can influence the text can also influence the context. Greenblatt gives a very famous example. The example that he gives is a staging of William Shakespeare's Richard II in London on the eve of the Essex Rebellion. Richard II, you must remember, is a play about the dethronement of a monarch. The very fact that the leaders of the Essex Rebellion arranged the staging of Richard II on the eve of their rebellion shows that they were keenly aware of the potential of the text to influence the context, the potential of literature to influence politics, to influence society. When Queen Elizabeth I came to know of it, she reacted to it in a very violent manner. She was extremely bitter about it. Again, this shows that Queen Elizabeth I was aware of the truth of what is now known as the new historicist axiom of the text being capable of influencing the context. While earlier schools of criticism attempted to discover, frequently attempted to discover a single vision, a single narrative, a single explanation which is free from contradictions. New Historicism is convinced that reality is frequently confused, not devoid of intersections, not free from contradictions, and it is the task of the critic to uncover all these uncomfortable aspects of literature and of life. Many schools of literary theory and practice attempt to see matters from the perspective of the dominant, from the perspective of the powerful, from the perspective of the victorious. New Historicism bluntly refuses to do such things. For example, we say Columbus discovered America. Did he? Ask the Red Indians who were living there, who had been living there for centuries when Columbus set foot on the American continent. They are sure to find the claim that Columbus discovered America to be absurd. Similarly, New Historicism makes lavish use of trivial incidents, insignificant anecdotes, unimportant details, because it believes that these seemingly trivial incidents, seemingly insignificant anecdotes, seemingly unimportant details are capable of casting brilliant light on the complex relationships binding literature, economics, politics, society, ideology with one another. Thus, New Historicism refuses to place the text under consideration in a vacuum, and instead it attempts to bring in the biography of the author, the social context in which he lived, the cultural environment in which he operated, the ideas circulating at the time, the events that took place in his period, the impacts to which he happened to be exposed, and attempts to weave all these strands, attempts to weave these numerous strands, attempts to weave these numerous strands together, dovetail them to create the fabric of its criticism. New historicism contains within itself an intrinsic modesty. New historicism never claims to offer a final solution to all problems, never claims to offer the definitive reading of a text. Instead, it believes that no reading is final, no reading is definitive, including the reading offered by it. I would like to wrap up this discussion by stating that New Historicism is a reciprocal concern with the historicity of texts and the textuality of history.